through its Winter Festivals Fund. Anyway, enough from me. Thanks again for coming, and I'll now pass it over to the chair of tonight's event, Louise Batchelor. Louise.
Jim, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Let me add my very warm welcome to this first, as I've discovered, St Andrew's Day conversation. For the past decade, St Andrew's Day has been an official bank holiday, and tonight people are out celebrating. Some people are sampling street food, I gather, in the capital. Others are out ceilidh dancing. We, however, are in, taking a long, hard look, perhaps not too hard, some of it I hope will be reasonably entertaining, at what it means to be Scottish, how much that has changed over recent decades, how it's been influenced perhaps by recent political events, by Brexit, by the independence referendum, and where we might be heading as the world gets smaller and as we grow more cosmopolitan or less. That might be another debating point tonight. I'm joined by a fantastic panel of guests for whom Scottishness is important at one level or another. First of all, the Right Honourable Henry McLeish, best known as a former First Minister of Scotland. This was the peak of a long political career spanning some 30 years, and he didn't even set out to be a career politician, choosing originally to be a professional footballer. He comes from Methil in Fife, just down the coast, and he says his early experiences as a child were wrapped up in pits, pitches, and politics. And he's already stolen the march on us this evening by appearing on Radio Scotland this morning, talking about Scottishness linked to this event. David Mach is a sculptor best known for some huge works and collages. The big heads are unmissable along the M8, big and red and made from welded tubes. The train, a massive brick locomotive near Darlington. Closer to home, you can see Phantom, which again is just down the coast. It stands, well, it rears up into the sky outside Morrison's supermarket on the Kirkcaldy Esplanade. It's made from driftwood covered by nail heads. Like Henry, David is from Methil and is quoted as saying, "I realise almost," it's a theme, "everything I've done has been inspired by where I come from." Now, I've been warned before, never have two fifers on the same platform. I'm prepared to take the risk, but I am delighted to welcome, from the west coast of Scotland, the award-winning writer Janice Galloway. Janice was born in Saltcoats in Ayrshire and went to Ardrossan Academy, which she writes about in her book All Made Up. Education was the ticket to almost anything you wanted to be, and so it proved. Janice originally set out to be a musician, but I'm glad to say she decided to make a career in writing instead. And as well as that, she's been a broadcaster and collaborates with other artists. Muriel Gray is also a writer and a commentator and a broadcaster and lots of other things besides. This past couple of years or so, she's been in the news as chair of the Board of Governors of Glasgow School of Art and has had, of course, to deal with the awful fire in the Macintosh building and the huge project to rebuild it. She has also produced and presented many radio and TV programmes from music to Munro bagging. And later this evening, if we get finished in time, you'll be able to see her on BBC Two doing a programme about, or taking part in a programme about the National Museum of Scotland. Muriel comes from East Kilbride.
I don't.
You don't?
I was just born there.
So
We moved to a 6 months
I think we might have started the debate already. If you're born in a place, do you come from a place?
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your panel. Well, to start with, we're going to hear from the panellists, but I also want to hear from you, and there are going to be a couple of roving microphones. Please wait until they reach you once you've had your hand up for a bit. I'm dividing the evening into sections, so we're not going to be coming back and forth all night, but there'll be a couple of points during the evening at the end of certain sections where we would like to hear from you, and then I hope to open things out at the end so we can have a more general discussion. But to kick off with, panel, I want to strip away all those labels and achievements that I've given you and take you back to childhood. David, I'm going to start with you. Coming from Methil, or don't tell me you were just born there and didn't spend any time, but you're a Methil man. Any defining memories of childhood?
Oh God, Methil was I thought Methil was the centre of the universe when I was a kid, you know? And it was so busy. Everywhere you looked, there were people beavering away. To the left are brickworks, behind us a power station, to the right the docks, they were building oil rig platforms. Everywhere you looked, people were in full employment, making amazing things. The miners were in full swing. My dad worked for 35 years down the pit, in like 3 of the big pits along the coast. So to me, the work ethic at that time was fantastic. It was a simpler time, the politics were simpler. Although my dad was a miner, he should have voted for Labour, but he was Polish, my dad, and had been in a Labour camp in Siberia. Anything red, forget it. So the politics in the house was a very, very weird thing. But it was a really robust place, and all of that industry, all of that effort, right next door to fabulous countryside, farmed to death, next to beautiful beaches with the best light in the whole of the UK. And I kid you not. I don't understand why Fife is not completely crammed full of painters, as a matter of fact. Twix, they should be painting it.
How come you turned to sculpting?
Oh, God knows. Well, I'm an idiot, you know what I mean? I think that I like the excess of everything I saw. You know, any job I ever had as a young man in Fife, in Methil and Leave, and around that neighbourhood, was involved with the mass production processes, things like that. So I watched millions of gallons of whiskey being bottled in the local bottling plant. I even made telegraph poles. You know, when the whole world was going digital, we were still making telegraph poles in Methil to ship it to God knows where. And I liked that sort of stuff. And it was a very, very, very physical thing. And I guess I'm made like that.
That does explain a lot.
Yeah.
Having a Polish father, were you aware, I'm not sure that any of us are aware when we're growing up that we are of any nationality or belong to a particular place for a while, but did you feel you grew up in a Scottish household, or was it more Polish household?
I had a very weird we lived in Fife, we went to Glasgow an awful lot. My mum was Glaswegian, hated being in Fife. She was a big city girl when Glasgow was like New York, you know? Glasgow really was this great big dirty Gothic city. When I remember when I was 5. I remember the trams, I remember all that stuff, and that was great. And we would also go to Poland, you know? So you'd have this kind of weird kind of threesome.
So you were a mixed-up kid, a bit.
I've always felt very Scottish, and I've always been very happy to be that. And I've always felt it was a cheat to be Scottish, because everywhere I went, there had been Scots there before me who kind of shoehorned me into the dance. You know, and I didn't have to do a damn thing except to say.
You just say you're Scottish and you're in.
But actually, maybe apart from London, it's a bit tricky.
Oh, that's interesting as well. Henry, was your experience of Methil similar?
Yes, it was a good one. I mean, I agree with David that it was a good place to be, but life was simpler. You know, politics was simpler, and being a kid at that. And I mean, I had a kind of, as you said earlier about pits, pitches and politics, that I had a grandmother who was a battle-axe socialist. If you think you've ever met anyone who hated Conservatives, you had to meet my grandmother. It was a different realm. I had a grandfather who was an evangelical socialist, and so you got a lot of stuff about the common good, the public purpose and whatever. And of course I played football, so much so that from the ages of 2 to about 15 I did nothing but play football, and I lost about 13 years of my life, so much so that when I left school for the first time, when I went to Seinfeld Leeds United, the rector wrote on my report card, "Thank God the boy can play football because he's absolutely useless at everything else." It wasn't really a confidence builder, you know, but nevertheless, I suppose the other highlight was I keep trying to explain to my grandkids, 5 of them, what it was like to have an outside toilet, because they just think I'm making it up. And this was the kind of miners' rows that we had. So the politics, and the other point for me was one about, I suppose it is the common good issue in Scottish politics today, that a grandfather was, you subconsciously pick up all of this stuff, but I think by the age of 12 I could recite the Book of John. You know, you asked me to name a proverb. You picked all of this thing up, and of course I'm not part of any church now, not part of any faith, but it was a kind of good upbringing, good background. And the final point, which is the funny one about the football, Some people think that if you're a politician, you've never worked in your life anyway, but this story confirms it. So my mother every year wanted to go, and I think it's referred to as Totty Howking. You know what that is? Yeah, even for posh folk in St Andrews. Picking potatoes. So anyway, I wanted a Real Madrid strip, and it cost 14 shillings, 11 and a half old pence. So I went there and worked for one day to get that money, and I've never worked since, because I've never done such back-breaking work in my life. My mother was proud of me, but that was the first and only day I did some hard work. So a lot of good memories as a kid, but it was a good background, and I agree with the point about strong ethics, now whether it's a work ethic or whatever, and there was even at that time a great deal of tolerance around.
We'll come back to what might have been a defining moment that took you into the politics, but to save this turning into sort of ping-pong, going back, Muriel, now you say you were born in East Kilbride, but you didn't stay there long, so tell me about some
this is like
defining memories.
Well, it's kind of top trumps exoticism here, isn't it? So I'm going to have a bash. Yeah, because
I was brought up in a souk.
No, my maternal grandmother was an Indian Jew who married a Scottish Free Presbyterian. Yeah, you see, I'm already one. Yeah, it's good. It gets better.
I think we can see.
Who's the daddy? And so she left Delhi, where she had served and came back and found herself scrubbing the stairs in a close in Denniston, but it all seemed to go very well. But she converted to Christianity, but she retained every, like Life of Pi, every single thing. She could speak fluent Urdu and Hindi, and she celebrated Diwali and Hanukkah and Easter and Lent and everything. It was, and I just thought that was completely normal, right?
It's interesting that both of you mentioned your grandparents as the influences, particularly grandmothers. So when did you realise you were you in your own right?
Because my father's parents lived in a slum, single-end room and kitchen with an outside toilet by the Middens in Mary Hill, and and the Irish collection. So, but I only say this not to trump your exoticism, but because you thought all of that was completely normal because we were just all Scottish, and even the fact that my
did you know that?
Yeah,
you were aware that you were.
Yeah, because I grew up in Dumfries till I was 6. Because my dad was a boiler engineer at Cochrane's. The only reason I was born in East Kilbride was because he was an engineer at Rolls-Royce, and he got a tied house. And then moved back up to Glasgow for the rest of life. And it's just, we were all massively Scottish. But unfortunately, I have a slightly different memory of that. I remember massive sectarianism and lots of really bad things as well as gorgeous things too, because it was riven in our family, because my father's family had Irish-Scottish connections in Northern Ireland.
So you were aware of the tribalism?
Oh man, not just aware of it, I was right in the middle of it. No, you didn't in Fife, not in gentle Fife.
Janice, you have the advantage or disadvantage in that you have written so extensively about your crowded childhood and everything you did and everywhere you went, and however much of it was made up, that we kind of know you. But what would you say, or we think we do, what were some of the definitive childhood memories?
Definitive is not an easy word. One of the things I'm struck by, because I have the advantage of having listened to everyone else speaking first, one of the things I'm quite clear about is listening to the chaps in particular, the menfolk, that most of my childhood was about, right from about the age of 8, it was about not getting pregnant.
Lucky you.
That was really, really important. You never met my sister, Louise. There was a reason why.
I feel as if I have.
Reason why it started young. And there were, it was mostly about restrictions. And of course, being in Saltcoats, for 2 weeks, every year, the Glasgow people came and made our town bearable. They had fun, they threw up on the beach, they hid in the pubs, and their kids were outside eating crisps. We had all that kind of lively interchange, but in general, nothing much happened in Saltcoats, apart from every so often some child would get pulled away on a wave. Some kid who'd never been told often enough that the tide comes in and then it goes back out, would disappear. And it was a kind of spooky leftover place to me. There was not much in the way of opportunity until I went to secondary school. My entire life changed at secondary school because I had the best music teacher in the world. And I'll arm wrestle anyone who says they had a better one. He was just absolutely a remarkable man. And he gave me the feeling that I could do anything I damn well wanted, which did go down well with my mother. Because as soon as you were off the leash, as soon as you were released into the community, as it were, the first thing a woman would do was get pregnant. It was certainly what she had done, it's what my sister did 3 times, it was what my granny did, it was her mother did, and her mother did, and it was a sort of family tradition. And the thing she overlooked was that I was lucky enough to be around when the pill recently became available. Ladies, did that or did that not change lives? That changed lives. That was an extraordinary thing. And that's, I suppose, the biggest thing I remember were a number of restrictions, and the things that were freeing came from somewhere else, I guess.
When did you become aware that you were Scottish?
I watched Lex McLean's show on the television. And because the Lex McLean show was on the television, people in the playground said, did you see there was something Scottish in the telly last night? There was a Scottish thing on the telly last night. There was huge pride and kind of shame at the same time because a Scottish thing had been on the television. But at least it proved you existed. The role of media in my childhood was massive. If you saw it on the telly, it was real. If you didn't see it on the telly, it possibly wasn't. So to have the blessing of seeing, if blessing it be, that Lex McLean was on the telly in a pub fighting with somebody, felt like some kind of a breakthrough and at the same time some kind of a shutdown, you know? There was this double-edged thing about nationality that was always there.
And at the time, I think, late 50s, early 60s, perhaps we're into the 1960s by now, Scotland was showing itself to the rest of the UK through the White Heather Club. I grew up in Dorset.
Yes,
and we were,
yes, it was.
This was the great thing for us to watch. Kenneth McKellar and so on and so forth, and all doing the dancing, which we all learnt at school. But this brings me then to the big question already. Is there such a thing as Scottish identity? Henry, do you want to have a stab at that? Does it?
Well, I suppose
there are all sorts of tartan and shortbread and whiskey and porridge and all these things one can pick as labels. But is there such a thing as a Scottish identity?
The first point you made about did you feel Scottish or when did you feel Scottish? I mean, I suppose in Methil in my early days there was nothing else. You were all Scottish.
Well, yes, that's what I mean. So
so there's no reference.
So you can only feel Scottish in relation to someone who's not.
Unlike the complications that we have just now. It was just, as I said, so easy then in that sense. So you didn't have a question of Scottish identity. That came much later for me. But on the other hand, people have multiple identities. We were part of the mining community. We were part of, indirectly, a church community. We were part of a football community. So you had multiple identities. And quite frankly, at that point in time, I'm sure you're not looking at, identify. And we didn't have the problems of the West. To be fair, there were some orange marches that took place around, but none of the pressures there. So it was a kind of quiet, mollycoddled environment.
So you might have identified with someone from Teesside or any working class place, mining village in the north of England.
There was a solidarity through the things I've talked about. In a sense, you played football, so therefore you travelled Scotland. You were involved in the mining industry before the Thatcher era in the mid-80s. And so therefore, through that, you kind of felt a solidarity because it was to use a phrase, it was a working class solidarity. But as I said, there was no particular reference group to make you angry or have angst about some other part of Scotland.
Was there, I'm going to turn to you, David, I'm going to keep putting the Methil men together, but was there anything that happened in the year that made you think, oh yes, this is when I'm Scottish and I'm celebrating being Scottish?
I don't think it was a problem being Scottish. I mean,
I'm not suggesting it was a problem, but was it a cause for celebration? That already feels quite Scottish to me.
Be Scottish. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem. It wasn't anything. It was you were just Scottish.
But was there a point when you marked it? Was Hogmanay a big thing in your?
When I travelled abroad to Poland, I started when I was 5. And you're travelling through the Eastern Bloc and into beyond the Iron Curtain. and you were proclaiming your Scottishness there from being just a little kid. You know, you were doing that already then. So then I really rather enjoyed that. And you learned very quickly that the Scots have got this massive history that you can you can steal. You know, you can sort of, we wear kilts.
Yes, that's us.
Things with 3 legs that run around the hillside. It's called we do all sorts of stuff. And we invented
So it's
every
more
damn
important
thing under the sun. And
abroad than at home.
Whether you knew about that or not, in fact, I'd lie about all of those damn things. We're great lovers. Scots, we can guarantee you'll, satisfaction.
In Methil as well?
Well, I don't know. I think
Wow.
that's my mother about that. But I'd sort of make up all sorts of stuff because I was you were kind of so hovering around being proud to be Scottish when it wasn't a cool thing. You know, the rest of the world is kind of sort of examining itself or questioning itself about their nationality. I never felt the need to do that as a Scot. I felt it gave me free rein to exaggerate, to lie, to just enjoy. You know, I felt,
But it was a very recognisable thing to
so
be
recognisable.
Scottish.
I mean, I would travel with like 5 English guys to San Francisco. And the 5 English guys would all get shit from the San Franciscans, and the women at the desk, the airport would say, "I just love your accent," and you'd be away off at some other sort of
That's
thing.
interesting.
Yeah? And it was a really fascinating thing. I felt bad about it because I didn't have to actually do anything. You know, I didn't own this thing. I didn't earn it. You know, but I did take advantage of it quite a few times. I must admit. You know, but the English guys couldn't do that because they're the bad guys. So,
Janice, I don't know if you travelled at that point, but is it more useful to be Scottish at home or abroad?
Jeez, that's a hell of a question.
I like to ask
Useful. Useful is an interesting
As
word.
in, you've got an immediate identity.
No.
And what I mean is, can you blend more easily here if you are recognisably Scottish, as opposed to an incomer, or is it more useful out there, where you say, I'm Scottish, and everyone immediately knows, oh yes, you're tartan, and you play the pipes, and you do this, and you do that.
But everybody didn't immediately know that. I remember the very first foreign holiday I went on with my boyfriend. My God, the incidence of foreign holidays. My mother never went anywhere further than Motherwell. And I got to go a holiday, and we went on planes, and we landed in Greece, and we got very sunburnt, and we had no idea what to eat. And someone came up to talk to us on the beach and said, "Where are you from?" And my boyfriend optimistically said, "England." And I said, "He's not from England, we're Scottish." And all we got was, "Where's that?"
Oh.
That was
So
all
he
we
said
got.
it because he anticipated that
He
question.
anticipated that. Charles was a diplomat. I was never a diplomat. I'm still not a diplomat. But he was the kind of person who could see trouble coming and he could head it off at the pass. I used to run out there with my arms wide open towards the trouble. And I found that in America because I was living with an Amish community, so that's maybe more understandable. And the Amish community I was living with didn't know where Scotland was. They didn't know where England was. The closest they could get was when I said Germany. You know?
Yeah.
So Scotland was very near Germany, very, very close to Germany, on a line of latitude with Moscow. All that stuff helped. I've never seen, it's now. This is the thing. The entire status thing has happened now. People certainly know where I'm from now. They know what our politics looks like now. You can't go to Germany or France or Italy without them asking about the mood of the mood for independence in the country and what's happening with Britain when it comes to the EU, because you don't seem to want it and they want it, and what will happen. We seem to be interesting now.
Agreed.
That's what I'm finding.
But you don't any longer have to explain where Scotland is or
Not at all.
what Scottishness is.
Not now.
Is there such a thing, Muriel, as Scottish identity? What is is
Yeah,
there a
of
typical
course.
Scot?
Come on, don't be preposterous. It's one of the strongest identities in the world, like David says.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay,
my
what
entire-
typifies a Scot?
Well, I mean, my entire career, because it was external to Scotland, was really predicated on being a token Scot at everything, which I've absolutely exploited to its full extent. And I'm sure that I've never had to explain ever anywhere in the world where Scotland is or being Scottish. I think the Amish, with respect, you probably have to explain where the Tesco's was. It's like, not actually the biggest.
What bits of you then make you Scottish? Perhaps to an outsider.
To an outsider, a bluntness, a sense of dark sense of humour, honesty, not particularly being affected by external forces that you think you should play up to. All these kind of things are mostly negative, actually. But if you can harness them in a more mature way and appreciate them as you get older, they're spectacularly good things to hang on to.
And are they held in common by all Scots?
Pretty much.
Because I'm
Pretty
wondering, you know, what do people from Methil have in common with people from St Andrews, apart from the fact you're all
That's a real international question.
You're all fifers. Well, I just wonder, you know, is there anything? And when you say there is, you know, don't be preposterous. There is Scottishness. Is there really between even one bit of Fife and another?
There's Scottishness, but the Scottish, I mean, it's not a huge country, but we still have, you can travel 10 miles in any damn direction you like and come across a different set of accents.
Yeah. Different idioms.
Terms of endearment,
different
all
food.
Dialects.
From Methil to St Andrews, my God, it might be as well be from Moscow to where you were with the Amish. You know, I mean, I love that stuff about Scotland. I love that about the UK, as a matter of fact.
The whole of the UK, yeah.
You express yourself in that way. When I was growing up, if you didn't know exactly what to say and how to say it in only 2 words, you could get into a hell of a lot of trouble quick. You know, so you learn the nuances of that language. That's actually bizarrely stood me in good stead all over the world. So when I look into somebody's eyes and I'm walking into a room to discuss, let's make a sculpture for, you know, Ipswich, town centre, I know that the guy I'm talking to doesn't give a shit about sculpture and doesn't want me to do the job, but that guy sitting over there, he does. You know, and you learn to kind of sort of deal with those kind of things.
Well, there's quite an important point here, which is, you've sort of slightly touched on, Janice, there as well, that coming from Scotland, taking for granted the strength of our culture and everything that you knew, we were influenced by cultures from all around the world all the time, because the centre of, if you like, energy and, you know, excitement, everything was places like London and America, and all our television was American and British. So we were sort of bilingual, because we knew everything about Scottish culture because we grew up in it, but we also knew what was going on in the rest of the world. It didn't work the other way. So I always used to find myself incredibly powerful, if you like, particularly when I worked mostly in England, where I knew absolutely everything that was going on because it came through the prism of London media and everything, but they were absolutely, completely baffled as to what was happening up here. That's
apart from
changed.
the White Heather Club, obviously.
Yeah, well, yeah, apart from the White Heather Club, but that gave you an enormous sense of superiority, because actually it was like being bilingual, and that's gone now, because the rest of the world has a view on us that's not particularly great.
Let's just find out what the audience thinks. Because you've sat there long enough without having a say over this, so we're looking for our roving mics, and we're probably looking for a little bit more light on you, so at least we can see you, even if you can see us. But while we're waiting for some light, yes, that's a good trick. Does anyone have any views or questions thus far as to what Scottishness is? Just here, yes. And please say who you are.
My name's Christopher Trotter, and although I have a voice which you can guess from where I'm from, I was actually born in Aberdeen, so I consider myself to be a Scot from that point of view. But I didn't want to ask that. The question I wanted to ask is directly of David, who talked about Methil having and seeing this great work ethic. Can I ask, when were you last in Methil, and do you still see that work ethic? And if not, what's happened?
Well, that work ethic is long gone. The work is long gone. And I was in Methil last week. I'm spending much more time up here in so I've been in Methil quite a bit, and I see the changes. But it changed from all the way back to Maggie Thatcher. You know, when they did the mines when I was leaving school in the 70s and 80s. From that point on, from then it was an incredibly busy place. Everybody was working, and like now there is hardly anything at all to do. But the whiskey guys are still going pretty strong. The whiskey ones are still pretty full, and actually they've doubled the size of it's now Diageo's, I guess. when I was a kid, it was something else that I'll remember in a minute. But almost all of the industry, including the place that made the telegraph poles, is long gone. You know, now that's not necessarily the fault of methlers or people from Fife. You know, that's the fault of all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
And with those going, has a sense of identity gone? Because I suppose
Well-
identity and community are closely linked.
Well, maybe I'm a different person now to what I was then. You know, I've lived in London for the last 35 years. So hell, it's bizarre for me because I was actually expecting somebody to say, "What the fuck would you know about being Scottish? You live in London, you know." And from the guy 2 doors along from you, I could see his face in death. You know, I asked that question. And I live in London for that length of time, and if I go out for an evening to a private view, people say, "And are you staying the whole weekend?" Fuck, do you know how expensive it is to live in this town? And so I think a good Scot may well be of no fixed abode, as a matter of fact. You can actually be weirdly nomadic like that, but I mean, going back to Methil and Fife, it's changed beyond belief industrially. And I would like to see all of that come back, but how the hell can it work?
But that's the issue that links us with today, you know, the question, because Methil at the time, up until the mid-80s, where Mrs. Thatcher decided to have this configuration with the mine workers, you had a situation where people worked in hard jobs, they were paid extremely well. My father was the top of the industrial league in terms of mine workers, but that's all gone. And what we've missed is the disconnect, because you cannot bring to Methil new mining jobs. It used to be steel and leading. There's no steel. So when you take some of the big industries, and what you've left then is a legacy. And we often worry about young people moving through life, you know, leaving school, going into work. But you look at the opportunities that are now available in somewhere like Methil. It's really quite worrying. And then it's little wonder then that politically in Western democracies, whether it be in the US, whether it be in Pennsylvania or Minnesota or whatever, if you come to Scotland, you take Brexit, you take a whole bunch of things, people have not only lost work and the prospect of well-paid work, they've actually lost cultural connections. And so what you're getting is a sad situation that's reflected throughout a lot of the northern parts of England, plus Scotland. And because it's not saying that we had a great work ethic and St Andrews didn't or Glasgow didn't, it was just a matter of fact that people saw a vision ahead of them where they might end up in a mine, but they'd be well paid. But now they're maybe offered the prospect of being a waiter or working in a job that's less well paid, less secure, 0 hours, whatever. And I just think we've missed that big connection in our employment culture, in our economic culture, and the political consequences now in the fallouts are really quite dramatic. And
Henry, I'm determined to keep this coming back to the Scottish identity question, which after all is the theme. I'm just wondering what the effect of all that has been on people's sense of identity, especially a sense of pride if there aren't real jobs. But to take us into the politics of it all, did the independence referendum debate bring back a sense of Scottishness? I'm going to lob that back to you as the politician on the panel.
Well, Matt, you talk about the sense of Scottishness. I mean, when I went to Westminster as an MP in '87, that's when I started to think about identity. To a considerable extent. It wasn't because I was in a very privileged place in London or in London itself, but it was the recognition that there are differences. And so therefore at that point, there was an evolution in my own thinking that there are differences which were not obviously available when you were young or you were leader of the council in Fife as I was. So I think that's the point it started. And there's no doubt then that the identity issue has become a crucial point.
And at that point when you started to think about Scotland and Scottishness, from being in England, what did you like to play up to? What were the characteristics that you were proudest of, that you wanted to stress?
Well, I suppose in a way it's pathetic, but you know, it's the politics. I mean, I believe the essential difference between Scotland and England at the present time is about the politics. And you can measure that in any way. But when hitting London at that point, it seemed to me that Scottish politics were very different. And it wasn't just because we needed a parliament or we needed devolution. It was just a very different political ethos, a very different political philosophy that was around. And so therefore, to me, that's now one of the big factors that's going to decide the future of Scotland relative to England. Not so much about constitutional shake-ups, but actually just the divergence of two countries that post-war were very much linked in this part of the Union. So being Scottish, I think, just made it much sharper, much clearer to me that there are differences, but it wasn't about nationalism, and it wasn't about superiority, and it wasn't about here's to us, was like us. It was actually, hey, these are healthy differences that you can actually make a nation of.
Okay, while the lights are up, does anyone else from the audience want to come in? Yes, gentleman there. The roving microphone's vanished. I think David's now clutching it. It's all right, no, we'll hear you much better with the microphone. Thank you.
My name's Rod Crawford. I actually live in the same street as Henry in Falkland. And
Methyl night.
I mean, I do remember, you know, back, well, I don't remember, but I know that back in the early 50s, the Tories did very well in Scotland. But all the time I was growing up, the political climate, the political culture of Scotland was very much Labour orientated. And I spent over 20 years in the Labour Party myself as a member, an activist and a representative. And I just wanted to ask Henry what went wrong.
We don't have time.
No,
but I am going to ask Muriel, actually, what do you think about what happened to any national sense of identity through the independence referendum debate? And has Brexit changed that at all? It's a big question.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Well, I'm going to answer that gentleman's question, actually, in my opinion. Well, it's just one opinion, it's not a particularly informed one, but I would say that our generation particularly, Scotland has always been very left-leaning from a really interesting point of view that separates it from other parts of the UK, that the middle class were still left-wing. And that's because they were, as we've heard from everybody's childhood, still really connected post-war to people who had been through really hard times, and almost everybody had in their background some kind of connection with working class post-industrial Scotland. And that link was broken during Thatcherism massively, probably to the extent of 4 generations who were forced, I think, to stop the work ethic because they didn't have any choice, but they ended up being dependent on benefits with no hope and no real connection to that work ethic that actually gave them some kind of sense of purpose and dignity. So you used to get people in Bearsden who are doctors and lawyers still voting Labour because their parents, the grandparents, had come from single ends and so on. And so there was that class break for a start, so there wasn't that connection anymore. And then the big elephant in the room that nobody's talking about that we're actually using tonight is technology, because that's connected everybody, that's encouraged globalisation, which I tend to think was a good thing, broke down barriers, and everyone started to realise, in fact, you weren't morally superior just because of where you were born, because you were English, or you were New Zealand, or you were from Peru. You were just, it's an accident of birth, and you could only be judged by 3 things: conduct, conduct, and conduct. And the internet and the connectivity between everybody across the world, I thought, in my naivety, was the beginning of the end of barriers and greater and bigger unions. But what I didn't see coming was, of course, the ability of the internet to make echo chambers and tribes and make everybody go back, and the use of populism, and everyone to huddle in their terror and fear and become small and tiny again. Yeah.
What might have diluted identity has actually magnified it.
Yes, indeed, it has.
It's interesting. Janice, is that your view? Is that what you're seeing as well? That Scottishness, nationalist Scottishness, has become much more important just in the last few years?
Well, it's my first real encounter with having to think about what it means to be a Scot. I mean, I am astonished by your confidence in this, because my mother hid the fact that she was Scottish. When, here we go. I bought her a phone when I got my first job. I was a teacher. I was the first person in the family to be a teacher. They'd always been servants or secretaries. It was an all-women household, I should say that as well. I mean, my household was different from what you guys had, in that it was an all-women household, so there was never any expectation that any of us were going to do anything fancy at all. The best thing we could do was not get pregnant. That was the really good thing. The second good thing was try and stay independent, hen, never depend on a man for money, because my mother had been brought up to depend on a man for money, and it had taken her precisely nowhere. She was a school dinner lady, and then she was a servant. She was a domestic servant. My sister was a secretary. And that was the pride of our house. Our sister worked in Glasgow for a firm that dealt with the stock market. Her boss had manicures.
What would they have made of the rise of the SNP?
Horrified.
Really?
Absolutely horrified, because my mother did not like being Scottish. She didn't see it as a bonus. And she always said to me, go to England, hen, try and get work in England. But at the same time, where she went was the north. Part of her childhood had been lived in the north of England. The south of England might as well have been Hong Kong.
And what do you make of the rise of the SNP, and do you feel they have hijacked Scottishness?
No, not at all. I worked with some painters and some singers and some musicians and stuff like that during the referendum. They put on lots of concerts. And all they did was put concerts on and said, this is what we do, would anybody like the mic? And you got up to do your song as though you were in the pub. Years and years ago, you could get up and do your turn as you felt like it. My turn when I was 10 was singing something from My Fair Lady. It didn't have to be anything to do with Scottishness at all. You could just get up and do your turn, and it just felt like people. And I think that made a huge difference to me in realising these people had always been there. These people had always had their diverse interests, and now what they were looking for was something that was akin to a kind of respect for the fact that they were not English and not Welsh and not Irish. It was simply that thing that we are a something, we are a people, was what I felt.
Can I just point out that you've just said something really interesting, because a friend of mine, really, really close friend of mine, who's one of Scotland's greatest separatist activists, and who I love very much, we had this conversation that's got really, it's almost exactly what you said. He had no confidence in being Scottish. And he said that he used to cringe when he heard Jimmy Shand and just feel fabulous when he heard Jimi Hendrix. And I went, how interesting. No, that's the point. That's the point. Stay with me, David, stay with me. And I nearly said his name there. I don't want to bring him into this because he's very well known. But it was his, and I never felt like that, ever. I used to backcomb my hair to take the floor on a Friday night, and before I went out clubbing as a punk, because I loved Robbie Shepherd so much. So I had never any problem at all with loving the White Heather Club and loving Star Trek. No problem at all. He, however, did, and he is one of the leading figures pushing independence, and I think, gosh, it's your insecurity that's doing it. And we've had this conversation. I go, you've never felt...
Sorry, was that inner security?
No, insecurity.
Right.
Insecurity about his Scottishness was made him go, oh, I finally feel that. You've just said almost the exact same as him, and I find that fascinating. It's kind of like, at last, something that we can believe in. I was going, but surely you've loved this all your life. Why have you only just discovered it?
Because you've been in denial about it.
Because of the kind of family we came from.
Yeah, well, he must have had a similar upbringing.
Because of the kind of family we came from, which also had to do with poverty. And the people you knew, and everybody in your family had always been either a miner or a servant or somebody who was servile in some capacity.
But just my family were
not something to be proud
as well,
of.
but they were really confident, poverty-stricken people. So
it was a badge of honour.
they were really happy and delighted to be Scottish, but they were absolutely happy.
Can you hear me without this bloody thing?
No, you need to.
No, you need to have that one. Yes.
I think that's. I feel like exactly like that. You weren't. I mean, my mum and dad. My dad was a full-time working miner. They were always skint.
Yeah.
They weren't poor. They were just skint. And they were perfectly happy to be those people. They didn't feel less. Didn't feel.
But isn't that because just about everybody else was about the same? As you mentioned Thatcher. Thatcher came along and changed it. So lots of people lived in council houses, probably the majority. Everyone could get a comprehensive education.
Well, the education. I mean,
everyone could, if they tried. Everyone could get to university with a grant and so forth. So none of this was a barrier. And since the 80s, all that's changed.
Well, there was a gentleman asked him about what went wrong with the Labour Party and all those things. I mean, we got a free education.
Yeah,
we went
absolutely.
to, now you damn well don't, now it costs a bloody fortune. What happened there? That shouldn't be the case. You should still get that. Somehow or other, we should have managed, whether it was, I mean, I'm not particularly political, so I'm not going to vote for Labour or the Tories. I'm not really interested in all that stuff. But one of you should have got that right, you know? One of you should have actually kept that.
Well, before we get overly negative,
Can I
is
just make
there
a
a...
point?
Well, I was just going to say, is there a
I'll
way...
see you in the street tomorrow, actually, so we'll go into
See you.
a bit more depth.
Yes.
But could I just make the point, though, that, you know, there is a real confusion between Scottishness, national identity, and nationalism. And that's why I think that, you know, that people like to think there's been a great kind of revolution in terms of post-referendum, whatever. But I do think we've got to look closely, because I'm just of the opinion that the national identity issue, that's provided a focus for people to assemble around. But it's also about the crisis in 2008. It's also about some of the issues we've talked about. It is Brexit. It is Trumpism. It is Le Pen. It is what's happening. And so therefore, I think Scotland, it's not a confused state of mind just now, but it's clearly a difficult one, because if you take the mere advent of a party that's been in power now for 10 years come next year, the polls are not moving. There has certainly been a resurgence of around the identity issue post-September 2014, but I think the jury's still out on what this is actually all about, and I tend to think that what's happening in Western democracies is sweeping through Scotland, but we've actually called it SNP and nationalism, and that is actually more inclusive, you know, more tolerant, but similar issues are
I
Nationalism is
see there was a hand up. Do put your hand back up, and then we can get the roving mic to you. So you've just opened such a can of worms there, Henry.
Indeed.
Thank you. Yes.
I would just say, with my English accent, being Scottish is brilliant because you have a very clear identity. But to what extent could you say, had you been born in England, would you still regard yourselves as Scottish? And to what extent would you say somebody who has come from England, who's lived half their life in England, half their life in Scotland, could one ever be truly accepted without a Scottish accent?
No.
It's funny that David's jumped in, because I was going to say, with your experience of living in both places, at which point, I mean, if you are born in England of Scottish parents, are you Scottish or English? Or if you're born in Scotland of English parents or Polish parents or Asian parents, are you Scottish?
Oh, God, doesn't matter. I mean, you've got both worlds there. You've got both the English and the Scots. I mean, my God, two great nations. The English are great. I love the English. I love the Irish. I love the Welsh. I love the UK. I love the G. I miss saying Great Britain. I miss that.
Oh.
You know?
But you're saying you can't, if
You
you've
can
got an
still
English
say
accent,
it.
you can't
It
say
still
what
is
you
Great
want.
Britain.
If I was you, I'd clear everything, you know? If you've got both those, like,
My father's Irish, my mother's Norwegian.
my God,
I just don't dare say I'm English.
that's a very sexy combination you've got there.
So what do you say? And you've lost your microphone.
I usually say, I can speak Norwegian.
So you could...
Who gives you a hard time when you say you're English?
Microphone back.
Well,
Yeah.
they give us a hard time. Well, the S&P have given quite a hard time. Even
That's
though,
awful.
Yeah,
That's awful.
they have identified the S&P as not English.
Well, it's reassuring. There's nothing in Scotland that gives us any pride in anyone behaving like that. This is just not acceptable.
But as you say, it was just an unfortunate campaign.
No, I mean, I had an unfortunate altercation with an 80-year-old woman at a book festival last year. I know, didn't mean to pick on an 80-year-old woman, but it was a friend of mine who's an author who's very, very left-wing, ex-communist comedian. And, you know, I always mind his back when he does book things in Scotland in case he says something that gets them hung. And this is absolutely gorgeous woman. You can tell immediately the talisman of, you know, a right-on person who sort of spent her life reading The Guardian and everything. And I'd first 10 minutes having a great conversation with her about, you know, what we'd just seen. And then she went, stabbed her finger, she went, "Are you yes or you no?" And I went, "Are you Protestant or Catholic? Are you gay or you straight?" And she went, "I beg your pardon." I went, "That's what you just did." I said, I've spent my entire life, my entire adult life, trying to shut down people who go, "Are you gay, are you straight, are you Catholic, are you Protestant, are you Muslim, are you Christian?" I said, I'm not going to start a brand new set of bigotry, okay? So let's stop it right now. And to her great credit, she went, "I see what you mean." I see what you mean. I said,
Okay.
can we, you know,
Scottish and the best of both worlds, they go to London and they're Scottish.
yeah, that's it,
They're
bilingual.
admired, we have more-
But you
Not
can go to
anymore.
London as a Scot and be British.
We're not admired anymore.
and,
I'd like to know from everyone on the panel if Brexit has strengthened their feeling of Scottishness or changed their views or strengthened their views towards independence. I will start with you, Henry. Just a quick answer on this one. Has it made you feel more inclined, if there was to be another Indie Ref 2, to vote for independence?
I think Brexit has confused the position greatly. I think that I was a reluctant no the last referendum, and it's not because of any great surge on my part towards nationalism, because I agree with you about nationalism, but actually if Scotland comes out of the EU along with Britain, then I think there will be a very positive case in my mind to say that being part of the EU is a much more attractive proposition in my longer term, although if I have a longer term, than staying out of the EU. And so therefore, you can't have both now. In 2014, vote to stay in the Union, you get, buy one, get one free, you had the EU. The next referendum, if it takes place, and it won't be soon if it does take place, that's not the choice.
Okay, thank you.
So that will change.
Muriel, has it changed you in any way, the Brexit vote?
Brexit vote?
In terms of your feelings about independence?
Oh, no. Well, I was completely conflicted about independence referendum. I'm still making up my mind about it. Voting with heads, I've never even told my husband what I voted. I don't know. But Brexit, the only thing that changed my mind about how horrific populism is people were actually doing it as a protest vote a lot of the time and didn't actually understand the implications of it. So no, it hasn't changed anything material at all, because it was the UK that voted. Whether or not,
whatever you voted, I won't press you on it in that voting booth.
Well, happy to do that.
But would Brexit, and you could have voted yes, and Brexit would still make one then another referendum in order to strengthen the yes.
No, but for number one, everything is shifting. Right? We're on stands that are shifting. We have no idea what the EU is going to look like even in 5 years' time. Right? And the word nationalism is sweeping the world, from Trumpism to Le Pen to everybody is joining in this band. There might not be an EU in a decade, because stuff is changing so quickly, and who knows what the next 4 years of that American presidency is going to bring, and the rise of the far right. Right across Europe, and rise of the far right in our own country. So there are no certainties anymore. We go, well, that's what you get, you do that. So it would be preposterous to make a judgment about something so important as sovereignty.
So may have to make it quite fast. David, where do you stand on this? Has Brexit strengthened your feelings in any way about it?
Well, the Brexit thing, my head said to get the hell out of that thing. My head said stay, my heart said, it's corrupt and scary, but I don't think it really matters because we've done it now. And you better get yourself ready, because those Europeans are getting ready to shit all over the UK. They really are. It's not going to be a nice thing.
So where would you put Scotland in that?
I think we should get it the English and Irish and Welsh and start cuddling each other, because we're going to be kind of joint forces to survive this thing.
You're not turning to Europe?
I don't think it affects the Scots by themselves. It's a joke to think about it.
There's no guarantee that even if we decide to come into tomorrow that the European Union will exist.
I don't want to do it. We should stick together. We should actually see this thing out. I think. Now, anyway, this Brexit thing, you can't vote twice for Brexit, but apparently you can vote twice for Scottish referendum. What's going on there?
Are you frightened of nationalism, seeing what's happening with the right-wing movements in Europe and in America?
No. There's no comparison between the Scottish Nationalist Party.
You don't think it could
No.
swing that way?
It's not right-wing. There is nothing right-wing about it. And I find it just extraordinary also that Muriel's under the impression that I seem to be suffering from some kind of minor psychosis, but at least some kind of debility, which goes back to my childhood, which possibly a psychiatrist can fix, because I am interested in Scotland being independent. I don't think that's necessarily the case. There are those of us out there who have told that we're good as Scots. I just took it for granted. Have any of you read Trainspotting by Aaron Welch? It's one of the most iconic, one of the biggest names in Scottish identity literature, if you like. And Renton has a speech. He goes to the Highlands to try and inculcate his sense of Scottishness. And he has a speech which ends with being Scottish is shite. Don't tell me it's any anything. Being Scottish is shite. Now, where did that come from? Is he supposed to be suffering from some kind of psychosis as well? There were a lot of nonsense. I was attacked by a taxi driver in London. I had to take out an action, a police action against a guy for battering me because I was Scottish in his cab. All they needed to do was put it out. I think I'm Scottish outside his cab. There is a lot going on that we are seeing as individuals that perhaps might be fruitful here to discuss as something that we have seen as individuals. Okay, thank you. Yes. Hi.
My name is Liz. I'm actually a painter from Dyke. I couldn't be more. I feel like we should have more painters today. On Brexit, so I actually voted no for independence the first time, but I think if it was to come back round again, I'd probably vote yes. I think the first time I voted no due to sentimental reasons probably, but I actually do not think that all this around the world, it's not really to do with nationalism. I think there seems to be a mistrust between people and professional politicians. I feel like that seems to be what's happening. I don't know how you feel about it.
That's probably quite bad news for Henry.
No, I think the point about Brexit, the point about Trump, there is this in Western democracies, there's a lot happening, and the issue is it's related to economics, we've talked about that. But you know, one of the things about Trump, which he was markedly successful with, is that for authoritarians and populists and nationalists, you need someone to focus your attention on. Pre-war, First World War, Second World War, we knew what that was. Now, I'm not exaggerating to say that xenophobia, nativism, racism, intolerance of religions, that's also part and parcel of right-wing populism. And my main concern whether it's Brexit or another referendum in Scotland, the biggest fight is for an opposition and an alternative to what's actually going on in the world. And that's the answer to part of the question about Labour and other parties. You know, the Brexit is shaped around Farage, a fake anti-elite. I mean, how could he be anti-elite? How could Trump be anti-elite? But the problem is there's a vacuum being created, and to answer your point, I think what we need to do is, if you're talking about socialism or democratic socialism or social democracy, there has to be a fight back. And quite frankly, the Labour Party is not in a strong position to do that. I hope it may be, but on the other hand, if we don't, that vacuum will continue to fill throughout Europe. And if that's a slippery slope, then quite frankly, it'll put Brexit, it'll put Scottish independence referendum into the public perspective. There are huge issues.
And is it also the case, well, demonstrably the case, that these marketing men, the Farages, the Trumps and so forth, in this vacuum created by the lack of job opportunities and all the rest of it, they have appealed to the who can we blame?
Well,
and so they put through the who can we blame, which is always immigrants, of course, or people who are poorer than you because they're scroungers, or all of that sort of thing. In finding someone to blame, they've talked about this spurious nationalistic pride, you know, making America great again, and all the rest of it. Is that so? Politicians getting in the net for being marketing people, but that's what they're doing.
Well, the other thing for the Labour Party is that, you know, you talk about marketing, it's the market. I mean, you know, the market now operates in areas of social concern that shouldn't be there. There's no excesses. You know, and people who haven't seen a wage rise between 2008 and maybe 2020, and we see, however simplistic this argument is, other people gaining, other people benefiting, we've been left behind. How long can we expect ordinary people to accept that? So what you see is a manifestation of that, whether it be in America, whether it be in Brexit, whether it be in Scotland in terms of nationalism.
It's not, I mean, do you feel that in Scotland, it's not that the SNP are marching around in blacks or so, it feels very kind of calm and cool and still pretty kind of open-minded in all sorts of ways. I watch this stuff on the telly, I hear these kind of things, like, is it because I live in London and it seems more kind of cosmopolitan there? Or is it actually, oh my God, it's a terrible, a very civilised still. And so it does. And the SNP, but I mean, I've always thought, even when I was a kid, and the Labour Party were very, very strong, and all that the Scots were still very conservative. But maybe with a tiny, small C, but you never really felt like communists, or you never felt like that, you know, ever.
It was never, well, yeah. The Scottish nationalist thing was at one time, it seemed to be about people looking after their hunt, shooting, fishing rights. It was something that was a separate issue to anything that was massively political. You can't call it that today. That's just insane. You can't equate something like the new German nationalism with Scottish nationalism. Nationalism is the wrong word, the party have the wrong name. And you can play games, if you like, with words, and put your politics into something that is just a lousy banner or has become a lousy banner. It's impossible to change it at this stage, but to me, you can tell me what you think. I've always seen the SNP since the shift when the Labour Party was Blaired. That entire bit there has got an awful lot to answer for. And as the Blairism spread, and there was a kind of middle ground left that was not interested in working people anymore, that was where Vic Price, the SNP, saw its time. I've always seen its lifetime. Am I alone in that?
No. There's a good thing there. But I don't know, from my point of view, I don't know if Henry's seen it at political meetings and so forth. During the independence debate, before the referendum, everything did seem very civilised and very open, and everyone wanted to hear what everyone else had to say, and everyone was very pleasant. Afterwards, at a few of the things that I was at, including Brexit hustings and so forth, there was more extremism. I'm not saying massive extremism, but there were more extreme views and definitely more tribalism, and the sense if the person on the platform by then, and this is post the May election, if the person on the platform was SNP, they would be applauded no matter what they said by most of the audience. And there was this kind of war. So I feel that Louise Gray, I feel as if I've seen a change. There's more of if you're not for us, you're against us type of feeling out there. Henry,
I think that could be right. But you see after Brexit there was a spike in a number of things which is worrying. But see, one of the things that strikes me about Scotland, and this is why this is not an attack on the SNP, and there have been public comments which have been reasonably sympathetic to where they are. What's going on in European politics, what's going on in British politics, what's going on in American politics, is actually bigger than this. Because what you're seeing is a situation where partisanship is massive, and nothing's changed there. But it's the actual characteristics of right-wing populism, which the SNP isn't part of right-wing populism. It's actually shaping Brexit. I mean, we have people in the cabinet in the United Kingdom who I regard as treacherous to the Johnsons of the world, the Foxes of the world, because they actually just were involved in lying on an industrial scale to actually influence. Now, that's what they call it democracy, or they call it information. But, so my point is really not to attack the SNP, it's actually to say Scotland should realise it is part of European politics, and it's not a separate world on its own, and there are forces at work, there are issues to be discussed, especially on the social democratic side, and if they're not discussed, then I think politics will be the worst off for them.
Are we going to benefit if we stay in some way, keep within the European relationship, keep our borders open? So are we going to benefit from playing up Scottishness for our futures, or actually playing it down and trying to make ourselves more cosmopolitan in our world, more welcoming to anyone from outside, and generally more cosmopolitan? So I think we have to decide.
I don't actually think Scottish nationalism was necessarily about no Scottishness, despite names.
Do you think it's possible, I said earlier, haven't the nationalists hijacked it?
No.
I don't think so.
The name nationalism came from a long time before that, and they've stuck with it.
So
I was
Scottish
like
Nationalist Party and Scotland.
Brilliant.
74 countries, 7% of the people, only 8% of it. So there was a John MacArthur.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
There was
Really great, yeah.
somebody told me a funny story about he was driving around the Highlands, and he had the 74 sticker at the back of his brand new Volvo Estate. It was doing really, really well. We got the petrol pumps filling this car, and he says, why don't you have me a sticker at the back of the car? And he's 74, it's the name of a company, with a theatre company, black, cheated, started black on. Like something that only 7% of people, only 84% of black people. He says, well, there's no need to drag it out. I still can't sort of separate SNP from some kind of tree. When people say, hell, God, it's all, you know, it's a panic on the streets of Detroit here in Scotland. Well, no, it's not really. Yeah, there's a few folk having a few arguments, but actually, basically, we're still a welcoming country. We still welcome people in here. And actually, I think what you were talking about is, let's actually invite more folk in. Let's have more immigrants. Let's be more happy with the
That is one of the main triggers of SNP policy, is about an open door policy to immigrants, because we need people. We've got huge empty spaces. We need
them, and we can have them all.
I don't see how you manage to equate that with not being what the SNP wants. Maybe your idea of what it means is not necessarily based on anything that's been particularly.
Well, I'm trying to agree with you, because I don't think we're not a nationalist party in the sense of the, a goose-stepping nationalist party at all. They're very, very mild. In fact, it's quite sort of cheesy in that sort of sense, you know. I find them quite fun. So I thought they said,
right, I'm going to park that because we've started talking about land. I'd love to get onto land before, but let's get onto land and try and be slightly less political about this. I'm very curious, as from the people in the panel and from you out there, is what makes you feel you're home? If you've gone out of the country, you've come back, what makes you? Is there a bit of landscape, seascape, townscape, or you can go, I'm home. And I don't mean your front room, but just looking out for a moment. Is there a David?
Well,
the sculptor.
The thing about being Scottish, there's so many things you can dip into. I mean, we're proud of our sense of humour. We love that.
Well, I'm talking about you personally. Tie yourself to the landscape.
Well,
what makes you feel good?
Being on the beach between Largo and Leven, still, when I grew up on that beach, I'm still kind of, I've only realised recently that, because I've spent so much time in it, that everything I ever did came from that spot. To the point of me copying what I saw there, I actually just copied it. I didn't have a great idea, I was so clever. I just go, ooh, look at that, I'll copy that. And I made that within the art world and kind of got away with it.
Like what?
Well, I mean, the shape, you've got the Mile Dyke along the front of the coastline there, and that's a mile of square bits of concrete that actually the Polish paratroopers made when they were based here. So my dad probably made some of these damn things. And they're spaced with the idea that the Germans were going to invade us, let's get a few things to stop that happening. But if that's buried in the sand after so many years, the sand comes up around it, builds this fantastic form, and I've actually made things.
So when you
like
get kind of avalanches of magazines, that's come from there.
I'm building that thing in here, so clever, I'm avant-garde, man. Yeah, blah, blah. And actually, I just saw this thing.
Now we know. That's interesting.
But again, you've got a painter sitting over there. I mean, the light in this neck of the woods is just astonishing. I walked onto the beach in Leven into 5 inches of water, into a white cloud of har that was completely, closed around me. Like I've walked into heaven, you know? And I walked sort of 5 inches further into the water, and it gets deeper, so I know where the hell I'm going. You know, I'm not going to drown out there. You walk along the coast, and it kind of just dissipates. And you can't hear the damn thing, and you're all speckled with icy water. It's fabulous. The sun shines through it. If you're paying attention to those kind of things, they're really, really valuable. But I like actually in Bethel. I just love Bethel. My first poem is about me trying to remember how the hell it goes now. It doesn't interest me to come for Bethel. I'll remember it next. It's a very dark wee thing, you know, because they're very, you know, you've got that beautiful light, but you better watch yourself, because there may be somebody waiting around one of those concrete blocks to hit you over the head or something.
Janice, landscape, townscape, what does it for you? Where do you feel most
That's hard to
grounded?
say. I only ever visited the Scottish Highlands. I visited the Scottish Highlands for the first time when I was 35. I had no idea that was there, and that was life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. And going to Orkney and Shetland, absolutely life-changing. I think one of the things that that was wrong with the period in time that I came from was that you just didn't travel. You stayed where the work was, because that's where the work was, and because that's where the work was, and that was it. You stayed in the one place, and people didn't have the money to travel. My mother went one holiday, and it was to Yorkshire. My sister went to Malaga, and my mother was blue with jealousy, because that was far away and it was probably exotic. I had never travelled inside Scotland,
But
and
it's
to
not
do
so
that.
close seafront that does it for you. Is it the
Scotland
Highlands?
seafront is a terrible dump. It's covered in jellyfish and dead things. I never felt at home in Scotland. Never felt at home in Scotland. It was a place for Glasgow folk to come. I feel at home in a house. I'm sorry, it's going to come down to my front room.
It is your front room. Okay, that's all right. Muriel, Monrose's, second name, but
I'm sickeningly in love with almost everything about Scotland. I can't help, that's why I've never left it.
cityscape,
Both, I mean,
seascape, all of it.
absolutely everything. I used to love, because when David mentioned the trams, because Glasgow in the 60s was a filthy, sulphur-ridden before the Clean Air Act, and always pouring this rain. I just remember a big dark red sense when I absolutely loved it. I loved it. Oh man, it was brilliant. It's so beautiful, and there was always
Damn the Clean Air Act.
well, no, it was always half a tenement, that had been demolished. You could see the fireplaces in the wallpaper. I just thought it was one of those beautiful things I've ever seen. And of course, because we had no money either, the only holidays we could ever go was in a wee tent, and then I get the bus or the train, and my Uncle Billy used to leave us as Anglia sometimes, and we'd always go to the Highlands, and it was always miserable weather, but I just loved it so much, and I have never stopped loving it. And I even used to love getting the train up from England to Scotland. You'd watch the vernacular architecture change really slowly, just over the border. It would go from brick to stone. You go, oh, I'm coming home. And you get that little twinge where it's not brick houses anymore, it's stone houses, and it's not that.
I'm letting you off the hook there. If there's one place where you feel this'll do.
It's got to be one. Everything's gorgeous. Well, it would have to be probably up the mountains in Ascent, I think. I don't really have to think. I can't think of any. Well, no, I just can't. I've always got to be outside. I can't think of anywhere more beautiful, frankly. Really can't.
Henry.
Well, when I'm really depressed and the weather is bleak, as you know, in Scotland, I love to walk the battlefield at Culloden. Now you made up the conclusion. You made up the conclusion.
It went well, didn't it?
You're entirely wrong. It's just a place to recharge the batteries and.
I didn't give him notice of the question.
What
is it exactly about Culloden?
Coming back to Fife and coming back to Metal, the area between Largo and Leiden, it's always been a special place. Not because my football team plays further along the coast now, but that's always been a point. Scotland the place, not Scotland the emotion.
I think the land, the Scottish land, it knows how good looking it is.
Yeah.
I think
Centrifold.
tonight we're driving back from Dundee, and my God, did you see the sunset?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
You go around the corner, there's a bigger hill on that side, and you went on that side looking at it sort of cute as a.
It's like, I'll just put myself here.
Yeah. It's like it's arranging itself.
But on that point, we were up in Carnarvon here, and we were up in, I've never been there before, Appleton Buoy.
Are we all talking about
Of course we do. No, people don't. I gave a little quiz to a group that I was talking to, they had not a clue where it was, but it's the most beautiful place with sunsets that you would die for, because this is, so therefore it is Scotland the place.
You're blessed with a lot of stuff.
Anyone from the audience want to add to that? Yes. Oh, right, Christopher there, and there's a hand up. Before you move down to Christopher, there's a hand up right at the very back.
lady
Yeah,
there.
well,
Behind you.
Right.
Can I say
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
I'm
I'm so sorry.
My
Yes,
name's
you may.
Batchelor,
Yes.
and I travelled up on the train yesterday from England, and not just the buildings changed and landscape
I know,
changed.
it's
I went to
gorgeous.
a restaurant and a packed lunch on that train coming into Scotland. But we've talked globally, we've talked nationally, we've talked locally, and now you're asking about the landscape. And I think David, you just mentioned people in the sense of humour in Scotland, and I think it does come down what is the Scottishness and the sense of identity to the individual, each of us, and what we've grown up with, whether it's in taking advantage of your Scottishness or in train spots, being Scottish, being shy. What do? I've grown up with Ali's Tartan Army going to the World Cup, we were going to win it. I've seen Scotland, we've been the underdogs, we are often the underdogs, and what do we do with that? It's about individually what we do with that. We're resilient, we're resourceful, we will pick ourselves up, we believe, we don't, I mean, I do think I've been brought up with a granny who believed in everybody.
It's always down to the grannies.
Everybody. And we know those people. People start talking to
Thank
me when I
you.
get on the train to Scotland. So I think and I do think we need more hugs amongst us. Stay open and love each other, and it's up to each of us.
Thank you very much. And we'll pass it to the background.
Hi, so I was born in Kirkcaldy, but both my parents are English. But I'm 100% Scottish, and my parents now as well view themselves as 100% Scottish. And I think for me, I actually studied at university here, and I think there's a lot of people that are very, love Scottish culture, and I think for me it's about, Scottishness is about how much you want to be Scottish. And everyone here loves the landscape, loves the sunset, and it's about appreciating Scotland, and that for me is what Scottish identity would probably be.
So if you want to be Scottish badly enough, you can be.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. anyone and everyone.
Absolutely.
That's
Right.
absolutely
Wow.
right.
David would say, you said no earlier. Are you now persuaded?
No, I can imagine Kirkcaldy, they have no choice but to be consider themselves Scottish. Yeah. I was just thinking of trains. When I was a wee boy travelling on a train, I used to sort of look at English houses once we got past Scotland. I used to feel sorry for the English because they couldn't put Harling in their books. They were too poor.
I think that's reasonable.
But it's like, my auntie, Agnes moved down to Slough when she was 18, right? Yeah, I used to love going to Slough from a holidays. Yeah, well, yeah, it was amazing. But obviously her children were from Slough, and they were English, and she never lost her Scottish accent. She loved being from Slough, and even though she came from Maryhill, and I sort of loved that as well because we came down from Scotland, so I thought my Aunt Agnes is really proud of being from Slough, and why not? Slough was awesome then, and then so she embraced it because her husband and her children were from Slough, and even though she still spoke like she came from North Woodside Road, she considered herself English actually, even though she was still Scottish. So yeah, well why going? Oh, because she was the same. Because she loved everything about London.
I'm just going to say, that's quite a leap, actually.
Well, she was quite young.
Did she get away with it?
Yeah, we thought she was our coolest auntie. Because she had that funny, that she had an Easton sort of mid-Atlantic, she had a mid-Slough accent, which I wouldn't even attempt to try and imitate, but it was awesome. So it can work both ways, because she loved London and Slough. God bless her.
Do you find that when you're Scottish that people expect you to act in a certain way? Do you find that happens?
Like drink a lot?
Well, yeah.
Oh, that's terrible stereotyping.
You're sure no one more than that.
Yes.
Why? Well, because you're
Yes.
Scottish. Yeah. You'll not be scared because you're hard.
Yes. Again, you use that to your advantage, because even if you're not hard, you can pretend that you are hard. And I would do that for years, and even though not remotely hard, but you can actually pretend to be hard, yes. Very useful.
That's a very weird thing that you find yourself almost acting being Scottish as well as actually being Scottish.
But they used to do that, for instance, in America, they act at being upper class, even if they come from Slough.
Because it's expected of
because the
them.
Americans can't tell the difference between a regional accent, they can't sort of pinpoint the class. So all my English friends that moved out to America to work are considered to be members of the royal family, even though they come from Dagenham and things. So it's any national stereotype.
So what face, if it's not, well, yes, there are the stereotypes, but what face are we going to show to the world as
Andy
the world? Yes. Looks at us. He doesn't even live in Scotland.
Andy Murray looks like? Andy Murray looks like the guy. Who's the guy with the shoulders and bending that would?
John Heston. Oh, he
He
does.
looks like bloody Charles
He does
Heston.
look like young Charles Heston. I don't know why I bother to ask serious questions. Serious question I'm attempting to ask as we come to the end of this session is what face we're going to show to the rest of the world when we've got that very few, that 7%, I think it still is about 7% of people owning most of Scotland. So we've got very posh people owning most of Scotland with lots of money. We've lost the working class because there aren't any jobs. The middle class is maybe a bit fractured now. Some is Europe leaning, some of it isn't. What is the face we're going to show? Is it going to be a Scottish playing up the Scottishness with more St Andrew's Day celebrations and all of that? Or is it a much more cosmopolitan one? In other words, we're going to become more Scottish or less? Henry, you're looking thoughtful.
More Scottish or less?
I suppose in terms of qualities, we can get caught up in the issues that we've talked about. But for me, the Scottishness I would want to see is in a sense, we talked a lot where that we think we are confident. I think there's a confidence issue. I think we have a problem with success at times. And it seems to me, if we look ahead, the most important issue facing a lot of people talk about the method, etc., is the economy. The economy has got to be key to our future, and that means I think we've got to remain international, we've got to remain passionate, we've got to have pride in everything we've talked about tonight, but we've also got to realise that in the world we live in, we have to go up in terms of investment. We're not like Trump, we can't bring jobs back from here, there, and everywhere. So I think there's a bulk of stuff around the qualities we've talked about, but I'd just like Scotland to be more ambitious.
And should we keep Scottishness as a marketing device principle?
Well, I think it works pretty well as a marketing advice. I mean, all the qualities that people come with, whether it be whisky, whether it be castles, whether it be golf, whatever, especially in a town like this, that is all there. I'm just concerned that in the world we're moving into, whether we're independent, whether it's home rule or some federal setup, we've actually got to make sure that the economy and issues like that we've got to be much more ambitious. And we've got, just make a point, it sounds a bit trite, but look, I think there is an issue around nationalism. Patriotism is completely different. And I think, as I said on the radio this morning, that it was a great idea of Victor Hugo and, worried about Napoleon and worried about French nationalism. He wanted us eventually to be patriots of humanity. We're well placed to be patriots of humanity, concerned for our country, but actually concerned for a much wider world that we should always be reaching out to.
More or less Scottish? What's the way forward?
Neither way forward is by conduct. It's like what that lady said there. It's individual conduct. But it's also about government's conduct. And you can virtue signal for 10 years if you like. If you don't do anything, don't actually have something that you can show that you have done, it's meaningless. And Trump will get caught out on that very soon. And so it's about demonstrably making people's lives better. And you have to prove that by showing the evidence. And I don't care what flag that comes under, but it needs done, and it needs done urgently, and do it from an individual basis. And individuals force their government and their opposition to make sure that that's carried out. It's everyday tiny little things on our basis, and it's huge things when government has power to change it. And if government has power to change things and doesn't do so, then the population has to ask why it's not doing it.
So it's a kind of, well, I mean, paraphrasing wrongly, but I'm wondering if what you're saying is you kind of, look at our health service, fantastic, if they get it right. Look at our much improved education system, if they do it. I'm saying if they do it. Look at the jobs that we've managed to develop here. Look at how cosmopolitan we are. And by the way, we're also Scottish and rather proud of that.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of order of...
Yeah, it's totally the order. If the way to make the world admire you and to admire you for your particular identity is by being better than everybody else demonstrably. Not saying so, but demonstrably. So you're quite right. And so far, nobody's done it.
Okay, David, what do you
Well,
think?
I would agree with all of that. I think that you might be proud of Scotland being open to everything and everybody, and being ambitious and being hard working, and looking after our own, but looking after everybody else too. We want you in here, we want young guys, we want new technology, we want people creating work, we want to be ballsy and get out there. And, you know, that to me would be a bit, but I'm not, to me that is being Scottish, it's being as open as that.
And how do you make the incomes feel they can say they're Scottish?
Well, I don't
They're
think
not
you have to
incomes.
say they're Scottish. You know, I'm not going to ask you
But
to
they
come here.
belong.
They can belong because you welcome them, because you look after them, because you pay them fairly, because you don't make racist remarks. Because if anybody does, you shit on them from a great height.
So it's actions, as much as words.
That's what you do. You do all those things. And if Donald Trump ever comes over here again, we kick his arse instead of back to him.
He's probably watching. He's probably watching. We have a worldwide
I think
audience.
they love it when they came
Yes.
over and they were flying the Mexican flag. They came over, wasn't there a mariachi band?
That's right.
Fuck you, Donald.
Janice, finally, where would you put Scottishness in our way forward in the world?
I think part of the thing I've been struggling with listening to the points of view here is I am Scottish by default because I was born here.
Would you have chosen to
I've
be?
never seen it as a bonus, and I have seen it
now?
as something detrimental. I've never seen it as no, I don't see it as a bonus. It's your luck where you're born. That is not something that is governable. And I've always equated Scottishness with, since I've become more politically active, which wouldn't have been till my goodness, late 20s, for heaven's sake. I've always equated Scotland with internationalism. It's always been there for me. And I don't understand this idea that we're somehow looking after our own in many ways at all. The whole thing is going out the way, and it's what the Scots have always done. They've always taken their special talents, and they've taken them somewhere else and built little colonies of goodness here and there where they can. And that's what I equate with it. It's not me. It's not the terra firma. It's the people we are because of the moral choices we make, sure.
And that is a very wonderful note to end on. So Janice Galloway, David, very serious, David Mach, Muriel Gray, and Henry McLeish. Thank you all very much indeed for being a fantastic panel. Thank you. Thank the audience.
You should have told a joke, not to tell a joke. There's a wee woman walking down the high street in Paisley, and she's got two kids, and she's rolling one of the kids up the arse. He's doing that Billy Connolly thing, where the kids go right up in the air. And there's a German couple walking behind her, and they say, "Excuse me, madam, but we do not hurt our children in Dusseldorf." She says, well, we don't gas our Jews in Paisley."
I think we're off air. I think we're off air. Producer, please. That was the least of my worries. I was trying to get it off. But well done. You've got better sight than I. You have to look.